There is a moment in every man's life when he realizes that the world operates according to principles he was never taught in school. This understanding doesn't come from books or lectures, it arrives quietly, often during moments of failure, when the carefully constructed narratives about fairness and merit crumble against the weight of reality. The man who discovers this truth early possesses an advantage that most will never comprehend. He understands that survival, let alone prosperity, requires a deliberate shedding of weakness and the cultivation of what might be called quiet power, influence that operates beneath the surface, recognized by few, yet felt by all. The Machiavellian path is not about becoming ruthless or abandoning morality entirely. Rather, it is about understanding that the world rewards clarity, strategy, and an unflinching assessment of human nature. It is about recognizing that sentiment, nostalgia, and the desperate desire to be liked are vulnerabilities that will be exploited. The man who wishes to build genuine power must first engage in an internal war, a war against the weaker version of himself that seeks approval, fears judgment, and hesitates when decisiveness is required. This journey of self-destruction and reconstruction forms the foundation upon which all genuine influence is built. It is not a comfortable process. It requires honesty of a kind that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. But those who undertake it emerge as something fundamentally different from the people around them, not because they are superior in a moral sense, but because they understand the mechanisms through which the world actually operates. Part 1: The dismantling of self. The first strategic habit that separates the powerful from the powerless is the deliberate and unflinching audit of one's own weakness. Most people exist in a fog of self-deception about their own nature. They tell themselves stories about who they are, what they're capable of, and what they deserve. These stories serve a psychological function, they make life more bearable. But they are also prisons, and they ensure that a man remains trapped at his current level of power and influence. To build true power, one must begin by destroying the comfortable narratives. A man must examine himself as a surgeon examines a patient, with cold, objective precision. Where does he seek validation? What decisions does he make based on fear rather than strategy? Where does he compromise his interests for the sake of social approval? These are not easy questions to answer, but they are essential ones. The second habit that emerges from this process is calculated vulnerability management. There is a paradox in modern culture: authenticity is celebrated, yet vulnerability is punished. A man who is genuinely vulnerable, who admits his fears, insecurities, and limitations, will be remembered not as honest but as weak. The powerful understand this paradox and navigate it with precision. They do not become walls of invulnerability, shutting out all human connection. Rather, they become strategic in their vulnerability. They show weakness only when it serves a purpose, when it builds trust with someone useful, or when it lowers the defenses of someone they need to understand. This is not cynicism in its destructive form. It is an acknowledgement that every interaction is a negotiation, whether explicitly stated or not. The powerful control the terms of that negotiation by managing what information they reveal, to whom, and when. A man might show vulnerability to a therapist, a close family member, or a trusted mentor. But he will never make the mistake of revealing his true doubts and fears to those who seek to use him, those who are in competition with him, or those who merely wish to confirm their superior position. The third habit is the systematic elimination of emotional dependence on specific outcomes. A man who desperately needs a particular outcome, a job, a relationship, a piece of recognition, is already defeated. His desperation shows in his voice, his eyes, his body language. It affects his decision-making. It causes him to make concessions he should never make and to accept terms that damage his long-term interests. The powerful, by contrast, cultivate a stance of almost aristocratic indifference toward individual outcomes. This does not mean they don't care about achieving their goals. Rather, they have built their lives in such a way that any single failure or rejection is manageable. They have alternative paths, backup plans, and the capacity to walk away from situations that don't serve them. This habit is built through a process of controlled deprivation and adaptation. A man deliberately places himself in situations where he does not have a safety net. He applies for opportunities he does not feel entitled to. He initiates conversations with people who intimidate him. He takes risks where the cost of failure is significant but not catastrophic. Through this process, he builds psychological resilience. He discovers that rejection does not destroy him, that failure is survivable, and that the imagined catastrophes of his mind rarely match reality. This knowledge is worth more than any amount of theoretical education. The fourth habit that must be developed during this first phase is the cultivation of deep self-knowledge regarding one's natural strengths and inclinations. In the process of destroying weakness, a man must not lose sight of what makes him genuinely capable. The most successful practitioners of power do not try to remake themselves into something entirely foreign to their nature. Rather, they amplify and refine their natural tendencies. A man who is naturally observant becomes a strategic student of human behavior. A man who is naturally driven channels that drive toward ambitious goals. A man who is naturally creative uses that creativity to devise novel solutions to recurring problems. The key difference between those who leverage their strengths and those who merely possess them lies in intentionality. Most people stumble through life, vaguely aware of what they're good at but never developing these capabilities systematically. The powerful, by contrast, identify their genuine strengths through testing and feedback, and then they build their lives and strategies around these identified strengths. They do not waste energy trying to become something they are not. Instead, they become the best possible version of what they actually are. This phase of self-destruction culminates in the development of an internal fortress, not a defensive wall against the world, but rather a stable internal foundation. When a man has thoroughly examined his weaknesses, learned to manage his emotions strategically, built resilience through graduated challenges, and identified his genuine capabilities, something shifts. He no longer needs constant reassurance. He no longer makes decisions based on fear of judgment. He no longer mistakes comfort for progress. He has become someone who can act in the world from a position of genuine rather than performed strength. Part 2. The architecture of influence. Once a man has dismantled the weaker versions of himself, he is ready to begin constructing the architecture through which quiet power operates. This is where strategy becomes practical, where understanding theoretical principles translates into concrete influence over people and circumstances. The fifth habit is the development of strategic relationships, a skill that is entirely distinct from friendship or social popularity. In the marketplace of power, relationships are capital. But not all relationships are created equal. The powerful are extremely selective about where they invest their emotional and temporal resources. They understand that every relationship costs something in terms of attention and reciprocal obligation. Therefore, they invest strategically. A man must identify who in his sphere has power, influence, resources, or capabilities that matter to his own objectives. He must then develop relationships with these people, not through desperate neediness or obvious flattery, but through demonstrating value and building trust. This might mean introducing two powerful people to each other for mutual benefit. It might mean offering expertise, perspective, or information that the other person finds valuable. It might simply mean being reliable and competent in your dealings with them. The key is that these relationships are built on respect and mutual interest rather than on emotional intimacy. A man need not be friends with someone to maintain a powerful working relationship with them. In fact, the best strategic relationships often involve a level of professional distance that prevents the kind of vulnerability that breeds contempt. The powerful understand that there is a particular strength in being liked, but there is an even greater strength in being respected and feared. The sixth habit is the systematic gathering and organization of information. Power requires knowledge, not just abstract knowledge, but practical, specific information about the people, organizations, and circumstances that affect one's life. The powerful develop systems for learning. They observe how people behave under pressure. They ask questions that reveal motivations and fears. They track promises and actions to see who follows through and who does not. They maintain mental files on the strengths, weaknesses, preferences, and vulnerabilities of important people in their sphere. This information gathering must be done carefully and without obvious desperation. A man does not interrogate people directly about their fears. Rather, he learns through listening more than talking, through watching people carefully, and through connecting with others who have already gathered this information. He becomes known as someone who understands context, who remembers what others have said, and who can predict how people are likely to react in various circumstances. The seventh habit is perhaps the most misunderstood: the cultivation of patience and the mastery of timing. Power is not about moving quickly. It is about moving at precisely the right moment with decisive force. The weak move constantly because they are anxious, desperate, and afraid that if they do not act, opportunities will pass them by. The powerful wait, observing the situation, gathering information, and positioning themselves. When the moment arrives, when circumstances have aligned in their favor, they strike with speed and decisiveness that appears almost fortunate, but is actually the result of meticulous preparation. This habit is developed through meditation, through the study of history and how events actually unfold, and through repeated exercises in patience. A man must deliberately practice waiting when every instinct tells him to act. He must place long-term objectives above short-term satisfaction. He must resist the urge to prove himself or win every argument, recognizing that some battles are not worth the effort and that winning today might prevent him from winning tomorrow. The eighth habit is the strategic construction of one's public image. This is distinct from the cultivation of authenticity. It is about understanding that every person has a narrative around them, a set of beliefs that others hold about who they are and what they're capable of. The powerful are extremely intentional about what this narrative is. They understand that people do not interact with reality as it is, but with their interpretation of reality. Therefore, they invest heavily in shaping that interpretation. A man might deliberately choose to be seen as unusually competent, as remarkably loyal, as refreshingly honest, or as dangerously ambitious, depending on what serves his interests. He controls this image through what he says, what he visibly accomplishes, what he refuses to do, and what he associates himself with. He knows that a reputation, once established, requires relatively little maintenance. A man known for honesty can deceive once in a great while and still be believed. A man known for generosity will not be suspected of self-interest. A man known for calm competence will be given the benefit of the doubt in ambiguous situations. The ninth habit is the deliberate learning from those who have defeated you or stand in opposition to you. Most people either avoid examining their enemies or they obsess over them bitterly. The powerful, by contrast, treat enemies as teachers. They ask, "What have my enemies done well? What did they do that I did not anticipate? What capabilities do they possess that I lack? If I were to face them again, what would I do differently?" This is not about being friends with one's enemies, but about extracting useful learning from opposition. This habit requires a level of ego transcendence that most people never achieve. A man must be willing to acknowledge that someone he dislikes or who has harmed him might actually be more skilled in certain domains. He must study their methods carefully. He must credit them with intelligence and capability rather than dismissing them as merely lucky or malicious. Through this practice, he becomes stronger and more capable himself. He does not make the same mistakes twice. He does not fall for the same deceptions twice. Part 3: The consolidation of quiet power. The final stage in the development of quiet power is not a single transformation but, rather, an ongoing process of consolidation and evolution. This is where most men falter. Having built a foundation and constructed the initial architecture, they mistake this achievement for completion. But power, unlike most accomplishments, is not something you attain and then rest upon. It must be continuously maintained, refined, and adapted to changing circumstances. The 10th and final habit is what might be called perpetual reconstruction. The man who truly possesses quiet power understands that the world is always changing. Technologies emerge that make old skills obsolete. New generations rise with different values and expectations. Economic circumstances shift. Political landscapes transform. The powerful do not cling to methods that worked in the past simply because they worked in the past. Instead, they maintain a stance of continuous learning and adaptation. This habit manifests in several ways. First, a man must read constantly, not just for entertainment or escape, but to maintain current knowledge of how the world is changing. He must expose himself regularly to perspectives different from his own, not to be persuaded by them necessarily, but to understand how others think. He must seek out people who are at the cutting edge of their fields and learn from them. He must experiment with new approaches, being willing to fail in small ways in order to succeed in larger ways. Second, perpetual reconstruction means being willing to abandon strategies that have become ineffective, even if they were once successful. This is harder than it sounds. A man who has built power through a particular method, perhaps through exceptional hard work, or through clever manipulation, or through the cultivation of personal charm, will be tempted to believe that these methods will serve him indefinitely. But they will not. The world rewards different things at different times. The man who succeeds is the one who can recognize when his approach is becoming obsolete and pivot before he has become irrelevant. Third, it means continuously evaluating whether the price of maintaining power has become too high. This is where many men go astray. They build power, but, in doing so, they sacrifice things that matter to them: their health, their relationships with people they genuinely care about, their integrity. The truly powerful man recognizes when this has happened and makes course corrections. He might simplify his life, focusing on a narrower sphere of influence but with greater depth and meaning. He might step back from constant competition and focus on legacy building instead. The point is that he remains in control of his choices rather than being trapped by the momentum of previous strategies. Throughout all three phases, the dismantling of weakness, the construction of strategic power, and the perpetual evolution of that power, there is a thread that ties everything together. It is the recognition that the man who does not fear the destruction of his weak self can pursue objectives with a clarity and decisiveness that others cannot match. He will not cling to comfortable lies. He will not hide his failures or pretend to be someone he is not. He will not invest his self-worth in the approval of people who do not matter. He will not make decisions based on fear. This freedom, which comes only through having already survived the worst that failure can bring, is the foundation of quiet power. It allows a man to negotiate from a position of genuine strength rather than from desperation. It allows him to wait patiently while others scramble. It allows him to admit mistakes when admitting them serves his purposes, and to maintain positions when defending them is the right move. It allows him to be generous when generosity builds loyalty, and ruthless when ruthlessness is necessary for survival. The Machiavellian view of power is not cynical in the sense of believing that all human interaction is mere transaction. Rather, it is clear-eyed about the nature of human motivation and self-interest. It recognizes that most people are motivated first by their own interests and those of their immediate circle. It acknowledges that morality is often a luxury that only the secure can afford to practice consistently. But it also recognizes that a man can act in his own interests while maintaining his integrity, that he can be strategically ruthless while also being genuinely capable of loyalty and honor. The man who has successfully implemented these 10 habits has become something different from his earlier self. He is not necessarily happier. Power is not the same as happiness, and, in fact, the pursuit of power often involves sacrifice that decreases happiness in certain respects. But he is free. He is free from the constant anxiety of those who remain weak. He is free from the desperation that drives poor decision-making. He is free from the belief that the world owes him anything or that his plan for his life should work out according to his preferences. He has learned to desire outcomes, but not to be attached to them. He has learned to build and maintain relationships without becoming dependent on them. He has learned to adapt and evolve without losing his core identity. He has learned to win without cruelty and to maintain his word without being naive. He has learned, in short, to operate in the world as it actually is rather than as he wishes it to be. The process of acquiring quiet power is neither quick nor easy. It requires sustained effort, genuine courage, and a willingness to be honest in ways that most people avoid. It requires the ongoing destruction and reconstruction of self, a dance between who you were and who you are becoming. But, for the man who completes this journey, the rewards are substantial and enduring. He becomes someone whom the world takes seriously. He becomes someone whom others trust, respect, or fear, sometimes all three. Most importantly, he becomes someone who is difficult to harm, because he has already harmed himself in the ways that matter most, and has emerged stronger. The man who destroys his weak self can indeed never be destroyed by others. This is not a metaphor. It is a practical reality. When a man has already faced his fears, acknowledged his limitations, and rebuilt himself on a foundation of genuine capability, there is very little that others can threaten him with. They cannot threaten his reputation, because he has already decided what his reputation will be. They cannot threaten his livelihood, because he has built his life to be resilient to individual setbacks. They cannot threaten his self-worth, because he has built that on his own assessment rather than on others' approval. The Machiavellian path, then, is ultimately a path toward genuine freedom, not freedom from responsibility or consequence, but freedom from the desperate desire to control how others perceive you, freedom from the fear that drives most people toward poor decisions, and freedom to pursue what actually matters to you with full commitment and strategic clarity. This is quiet power at its essence, the power that requires no shouting, no aggression, no constant performance. It is simply the power that comes from being the kind of person who cannot be easily moved, easily fooled, or easily destroyed. And, once a man has become such a person, the world is forced to acknowledge him, whether it wishes to or not.